You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Part 4. In an odd way, I'm supposing it's a good thing that I remember my old nightmares in such detail, even now. I'm much older now than I was then, and yet the memories have stayed as vivid as they were actual, traumatic events that really happened. Then again, perhaps they were, given what I am only now coming round to admitting. If the authorities read this, I wonder if they will seek to have me locked up or institutionalized. I don't know when the statute of limitations runs out on acts I'm about to describe, but I suspect it's a long while, if there is a statute at all. Still, the fact that it's been decades since those events, and still no one has come looking for me, well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. As I said in the last piece, my miserable early childhood years, tormented by visions of poor little Barney being endlessly, repeatedly tortured, were more than just trauma. They were a spur to action. Perhaps it was their consistency, coupled with their eerie specificity to my old room, but I knew that there must be something that corresponded to reality in the visions. These days, it would have been easy to confirm this hypothesis using the internet, but I was born a while before the internet was fully invented. Even by the time I hit college, it was still something only the military used, and certainly not something of which most people were even aware. Still, it was in college that I was finally able to get some closure, however dark, on the origins of my recurring nightmares. The reason is that it was only in college that I had the resources to do the required research, however clunky they were. I won't bore you with the endless details of my tracking down old dusty reference books in my college library, or of sending away for them to other schools, or even my driving to obscure, practically abandoned historical societies maintained by some collection of lonely volunteers, only to come up short. But I will tell you the anecdotes that led to my discovering the truth. What I had to go on, as you can tell from my previous installments of the story, was very thin. I knew that Barney, whoever he was, must have lived either in an orphanage or lived near one. I also suspected that my room must have been his own room at one point. So, in all likelihood, he must be someone who lived at my old address. The first thing for me to do, therefore, was try to figure out what my house had been used for before my family lived in it. This took a lot of research, most of which led to frustrating dead ends, since the history of individual houses was far spottier and harder to access then than it is now. What's more, when I did finally manage to find property listings from ages ago for where my home stood, the results were bewildering. Until just over 20 years ago, before my family moved here, the property had been advertised as an open lot of wilderness, and even when that stopped, it was still only advertised as a private residence. No orphanage appeared to have ever stood there. I almost gave up right there. In fact, if it wasn't for a quirk of fate, which I suppose was fortunate after a fashion, I probably would have. It occurred my freshman year of college while I was home for Thanksgiving. One note before I tell it, since this story does necessarily involve actual locations or people whose names I don't want to tarnish after the fact, and since I want to disguise my own privacy, I'm going to use a number of false names for the people and places involved. Anyway, back to how I got my first clue. During Thanksgiving dinner, somewhere around the arrival of the third or fourth pie, one of the doors in our family home slammed rather loudly, causing my father to leap up and go check it. When he arrived back, he announced with some chagrin that one of the locks had gotten loose and would need to be repaired the next day. Hearing this, my great-aunt Gladys, whose crotchetiness would have probably survived divine intervention, let alone pie, piped up in her usual disapproving squawk. "Anthony," this was my father's name, "I will never understand why you insisted on moving your poor wife and children into a rusted-out midden heap like this. With what you earn, I think you would afford some place that doesn't seem like it might crash down around our ears." Knowing Aunt Gladys's love of needling my father, my sister Grace and I exchanged a look and a few giggles behind our hands. This was usually the part of the evening where things got very entertainingly awkward. But my father, he didn't take the bait. He just gave an indulgent sigh. "Gladys, I didn't get to be where I am by wasting money. And if you could see what the previous owner wanted for this place, you wouldn't turn your nose up at it so quickly." Aunt Gladys scoffed and poured herself another glass of sherry, apparently disappointed at her failure. I, however, was suddenly interested, so I spoke up instead. "Who were the previous owners, Dad?" Seeing the quizzical looks from my family, who probably never expected that sort of question from a teenage girl, I quickly lied that I'd been studying how to trace local history in college, and was thinking of doing a research project on our own house, since it was obviously old. This pacified everyone, and made my father give a hearty chuckle. "You know, I might actually want to read that paper if you do write it, Emma. I'd love to know if there was something we should have been told about this place that made it so cheap." He looked thoughtful for a moment and didn't continue. I tried again. "So, the previous owners?" "Hmm? Oh, right, the previous owners," my dad said, apparently jolted out of his thoughts. "Well, owner, actually. To tell you the truth, Emma, and my wife and I never met him. He always seemed to be out when we toured the house, and we did most of our business with the bank. From what I understand, he was some eccentric old fruit who made more money than God, and just decided he didn't need the place anymore. I think his name was Randall, or else something with an R." "Reynolds, Tony," said my mother. "Remember? At our housewarming party, we made a joke of how often people kept calling this the old Reynolds place." "Reynolds, right," laughed my father. "I knew it was something like that. I guess that housewarming was so tedious I just wanted to forget it." He winked at my mother. "I still remember you complaining about how the older women wouldn't stop talking your ear off with gossip about it." "I wish it was gossip," Mother replied indignantly. "That would have at least been a little interesting. No, they wouldn't shut up about how awful and inconvenient it was having to put up with Reynolds building this place." My eyes glazed over from it, but apparently he chose a particularly cumbersome way of doing it, or some irrelevant thing like that. "Well, he screwed up on one of the doors, anyway," Father chuckled. "So I guess all that inconvenience didn't get him particularly good results. Anyway, there you are, Emma. We got this house from some old weirdo named Reynolds, who I guess pissed off his neighbors. If you want his full name for your project, I can see if I still have the deed." I took him up on this, and was soon rewarded with an actual name to try and seek out in connection with our home. And, as you'll shortly see, it got me going in earnest, in a way I hadn't even begun to contemplate up until now. Because, yes, the man's surname was Reynolds. Barnett Reynolds.